How many passes does the team in white make? The answer is 13. But did you see the moonwalking bear?
That's great.
I like this video because it shows both aspects of attention pretty clearly here, and so I'll come back to it in just a second. But what is attention overall? Attention is essentially the ability to focus our mind on one or more objects or thoughts. Attention can be focused both on something in the external world or something internal to ourselves. Attention is limited in capacity. Attention can be internally or externally driven, and it's used in things like reading in a noisy environment or keeping track of things. I think you've all gotten a good demonstration of attention both from some of the activities, from the game, from your own thoughts before, but it involves ignoring some things to focus on others. In fact, if we go back to the quote from James that I introduced last week, I like this one because the quote was, "It implies withdrawal from some things in order to deal effectively with others." And this highlights the two major aspects of attention here. The first being response inhibition, the withdrawal from some things part, and the second half being selective attention, to deal effectively with others. So let's go into the first of these, response inhibition. Response inhibition is essentially the ability to inhibit a prepared response or a behavior. It refers to when you have some type of action or activity which is ready to go, which is all primed to happen, but you don't do it. It's inhibiting a response that's already been planned, and this is the kind of thing that allows us to control impulses. So you can see response inhibition in this is a fairly violent themed class now that I think about it, but this is in a as response inhibition in, for example, a police training exercise here.
Turn around! Clear!
You don't shoot the innocent bystander. And just because I like this, I'm going to show
Hey, thanks for shooting that guy.
the second half here.
Hey, my pleasure.
It's your pleasure? This was a human being you just killed. Bill Peart had a family. Oh, wow!
That's from Brooklyn.
I was going to say,
That is an American show. But essentially, you have to, in this kind of police training exercise, when that pops up, you don't shoot the innocent bystanders. You go for the bad guys, but not the innocent bystanders. That's why you have to prepare for something like this, because it's fairly automatic in that kind of situation. You can think of a more mundane situation if you have to, where you might have to inhibit a prepared response if you were driving a car like this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I've had that happen.
That was,
I got my license on a car.
wow.
Yeah.
Of course not.
Yeah, it's most North American drivers have a fairly ingrained set of actions. If you suddenly go over to Britain and have to change everything,
And
then you really have to inhibit a very automatic response.
They're all manual cars over there too, so you have.
Oh, right.
Yeah, that's the hardest thing
Really
is actually switching to doing gears with your left.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right.
And so let's bring it down to something that a situation like a child might encounter. So how many of you are familiar with the marshmallow experiment? Anyone? Okay, good. How many of you have seen videos of the marshmallow experiment? Okay. Maybe should I show you? Okay.
It's so good.
This is the marshmallow experiment.
Okay, so that's your. Alright, here's the deal. Marshmallow for you. You can either wait, and I'll give you another one if you wait, or you can eat it now. When I come back, I'll give you another one, so then you'll have two. But stay in here and stay in the chair till I come back, okay? Alright. I'm gonna go do something and then I'll come back.
It smells yummy. It smells really good.
It's up to you. You can have it now or you can wait. Okay? Stay in the chair, okay? Okay. Alright, so I'm gonna leave and then I'll come back, okay? So you can either eat it right now or you can wait. Either way, okay?
Right now. Oh.
How'd you do? Did you do good? You did? You wanted to eat it, didn't you? Yeah. So did I tell you to give you another one? Okay, now you can have both. Mm.
That's the marshmallow experiment. You can see there is a very potent response that's desired to be made there. And so you can see how response inhibition, this aspect of it, is not just valuable in a more academic environment, but it comes up in a more personal self-control, self-regulation type of situation as well. So let's take a look at a couple of tasks that you can use both in a classroom or activity type of setting that can involve this response inhibition aspect. So the first type of task that I'll introduce is a go, no-go task. And essentially what happens in a go, no-go task is you're asked to make a response to one type of signal that comes up, but another similar type of signal is when that comes up, then there's no response. So this is actually the same type of thing that we saw in the game earlier. If you say bibbidi bobbidi boo, you have to make the response boo as fast as possible. But if you just say boo, you make no response whatsoever. That is a go, no-go task right there, very clearly. You can bring this, you can adapt you can see there's lots of ways that you could easily adapt this type of thing to work with children. For example, a task in which they're asked to dance when they hear a piano, but not dance when they hear a drum, for example, or a different type of instrument. Just so long as the task involves responding to one type of signal, but not responding to a different type of signal. Now, you can raise this in difficulty up or down pretty easily as well. Some easy ways to make a task like this harder are by making the go and no-go signals more similar. If bibbidi-bobbidi-boo and boo are actually very, very similar, so it makes it very attention demanding because you really have to focus on precisely which signal you're receiving at that time. If you do bibbidi-bobbidi-boo versus clapping, for example, or jumping up and down, that would be much easier to inhibit the response to that because it's not quite as similar. Another way you can make this task harder is by making the no-go less frequent. So to bring it back to that game example, if you're doing bibbidi-bobbidi-boo, 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 boo. That last one is going to be hard because you get into you build up the association, you build up the potency to make that response, and so it requires even more attention in order to inhibit that response when the no-go signal comes up. So by making the no-go less frequent, you're making the task harder. Another easy way you can do that is just by making the overall response times faster. That was another thing we did in that game. You need to respond very, very quickly. If you have all the time in the world to consider your response, it's not nearly as attention demanding. So you can raise this up or down in difficulty according to the age group and the specific group of kids that you're working with. Something like response inhibition here is well, here, let me go on to the other task involving response inhibition, which is the stop signal task. Now, this is a very similar task, and in a lot of ways, it's almost the same task. The primary difference between a go/no-go task and a stop signal task is that you're asked to you have a signal which interrupts the response, and that's a signal to stop at a particular time. So if you keep responding to something over and over again until a particular signal comes up, then that's the stop signal. And that is that's the hallmark of a stop signal task. So for example, if you were asking a child to act like an animal, and then you have a signal to freeze, then that signal can be then what you have there is a stop signal task. So if you are asking them to act like an animal until they hear a drum, or until you yell the word stop even. Something like that, it would be a stop signal task, because they're receiving that, and then they need to inhibit their response to keep going. Again, very similar to a go/no-go task, and for practical purposes, it really doesn't make a big difference in terms of trying to distinguish one from the other, because they both get at the same aspect of attention, which is inhibiting a prepared response. So again, both of these involved repeated or continuous actions. And the reason for this is because they make the response really ready to go. The first time you're doing something, it's not as prepared, it's not as obvious, but after you've been doing the same action over and over and over, it becomes more and more automatic, and thus requiring more attention in order to inhibit that response. You can also use response inhibition instead of preparing that response by making it more and more automatic by doing it again. You can simply use a very strong natural response and try and inhibit that as well. So you'll encounter some circumstances where it's very natural to make a particular action. In asking people to inhibit that response works on their attentional capacity there.
Like the flinching.
Like the flinching, yeah. Yeah, there's actually a common psychological test called a flanker task. And anti-saccade task. Anti-saccade task might even be a better example. What happens is, if you're looking straight at something, they'll flash something on your right or left side and ask you to move your eyes in the opposite direction as the thing that flashed, which people can do, but it is hard and it requires a considerable amount of attention. It's a very natural, automatic response that people make, and so the ability to inhibit that helps work on attention. Okay. So let's move to the other half of this, which is selective attention. So this is exactly what it sounds like. It's selecting what we focus our attention on. And this happens often in the face of competing information. Again, there's 10,000 things going on in an environment, and you need to select specifically what you're going to focus on. And this is what allows us to complete a desired task, like completing your lesson right there, while ignoring information that is not relevant to what you're trying to do. So this can come up in a lot of natural artistic situations. For example, if you're directing a choir and you need to work on the tenor section for a while, you need to have the other people singing, but you need to focus your attention on just what's going on in that section. If you're an artist and if you're doing work, you may want to focus only on the color of what you're of say something you're sketching rather than a particular shape. So it's really what you choose to focus your attention on, and the ability to manage your own attention. So let's take this is a video that can illustrate this fact.
So how much or how little are we actually aware of? We decided to recreate one of Simon's most famous experiments to see for ourselves. Here's the setup. Our senior series producer, Vin, goes as a lost pedestrian and asks a passerby for directions.
Excuse me, I'm looking for the skyline.
Then, we break the two up, walking through them holding a large sheet of wood. Now watch as I replace Vin. You might think people would notice the switch, but almost half the time, they didn't. Of course, that means more than half the time they did. We only tried the experiment 9 times, and by no means was it good science. But we were surprised 4 people didn't notice the switch. In Simon's original experiment, 7 out of 15 people didn't either. So what determines whether or not you can figure out the switch?
When you look at another person, you encode what's relevant for what you're doing right then. In that case, giving directions. And you don't pay attention to the details that are irrelevant. Say what color their shirt is, or exactly how tall they are. As long as you are able to make sense of the meaning of the scene and roughly the main categories of that person, say their height, their age, what race they are, what sex they are, as long as those important things don't change, the meaning of the scene really hasn't changed, and you're not going to notice that anything's different.
So this is an example. It seems a bit surprising, but what they're focusing on is what's important to them. A stranger stops you on the street and asks you for directions. You're not going to be, what's important at that point to you as a helpful passerby is not exactly what shirt they're wearing or exactly how tall they are. It's where was I in giving directions and what do you need to do? So that's actually a good example of how our selective attention is it can come into play here. It's the majority of the time you're not getting, the person is remaining the same. So even though what we're showing here is an example of attention tripping you up, the majority of the time this is actually going to serve you well because this is going to focus your attention on what you're trying to do, and it's going to be, in general, a good tactic here. I should also point out that this is kind of the bread and butter of a lot of video editors as well. It's why we don't notice major continuity errors when they happen in movies. If you ever go onto any IMDb page and look at gaffes or something like that, you'll find a whole bunch of things that, once you notice them, can be really striking across any movie. Like he was wearing a scarf here and then he wasn't wearing a scarf in the very next scene, things like that. But we don't notice because it's not. It doesn't end up to being what's important to us. It's not what we're selecting our attention. So I'm going to give you one more example of how this a selective attention task here. And this is called a Stroop task. Have any of you done a Stroop task before, or familiar with it? It's the great thing about the Stroop task is even if you know it's coming, it still works. So in this one, do it to yourself silently, but as fast as you can, go through each row one at a time, across each row left to right, and just silently name the color to yourself. So you can start now. Raise your hand when you're done. Okay. Good. All right. So now we're going to do the exact same thing. Name the color that you see as fast as you can. And raise your hand when you're done. And one more. This time, again, don't name the word, name the color that you see as fast as you can. That's much more difficult and much more attentionally demanding here. So what people in psychology measure here is the difference in reaction time. How much longer did it take you to do that last one versus the other ones? And that's due to the role of interference, of competing information. So what we get, what we actually measure in a task like that is the ability to select one source of information here, in this case the visual color, and ignoring others, that is the word that it spells out. And what we find is if you look at this ability that you actually find quite a bit of variance among people. Some people will take considerably longer to do that task than others will. And this is one thing that we use as a way to measure people's attentional capacities. Yes?
Isn't that mutable? Like, can't you increase your ability to do that?
Yes, it is.
With practice?
Yes, it is. Yeah, this is something that you can work on. And not only is it mutable from within a lifespan, but it's also mutable from across times of day. If you do this when you're tired, you'll do a lot worse than if you do it, bright and early after you've had a coffee in the morning. It's it can vary a lot. I'm going to skip over the flanker task here, but
one more question with Stroop. Is it cheating if you squint, or if you intentionally, or if you intentionally only look at the first letter rather than reading the whole word, or is that a legitimate strategy?
That's generally cheating. Yes. Yeah.
Well,
We try not to do that, although it does work actually. Yes.
Yeah. Well, I was gonna say like focusing on one letter, for example.
Yeah.
But
But actually, that brings up a good point because if you're doing this for a psychological test,
you would do
then
it on
yes.
cloud, right? So
Yeah.
you would do it on cloud, so then the psychologists know, right?
Right. But if you're doing this, if you're doing a similar type of thing, if you need to focus on one aspect in the real world, in the source of, in the face of competing information, then that's actually a very good strategy to use.
Yeah.
That's it. This is a way of modulating your own attentional abilities. It's giving yourself a crutch when you need it.
So that's like being cognitively flexible to achieve an increase in selective attention ability.
Hence not cheating. Hence you're smart.
Bonus points. Yeah.
Extra credit.
So now we'll talk about the one last point of attention. This doesn't fit under either of the two task categories, but it's something that's highly worth mentioning, especially to people who are going to be working with attention. And that's the aspect of attention, it's limited capacity. So as I was alluding to just now, attention is highly limited capacity, both moment by moment and through the day. So if you look at that, if you remember that video that we showed in the beginning with the moonwalking gorilla, that was one of the reasons that works is because keeping track of all of the white team members is basically at our capacity of simultaneous attention. We don't have enough attention resource left to give any heed to the moonwalking bear. And attention is, in fact, the gateway to consciousness. Things don't get into consciousness unless they go through your attention in one way or another. So this limited capacity really affects what gets into our mind. That's why that video works. But it's also an important thing to keep in mind when you're working with multiple things at once. This limited capacity is obviously even more limited when you get to very, very young ages. When you get young enough.
Grade 7 and 8.
Yes.
Yeah, when they are pretty much like they are when they're 2.
Yes, that's what I told them, it's a good growth opportunity.
Yes.
But please don't make it growth opportunity.
But you get young enough and kids can only focus on between 0 and 1 thing at a time. So.
And they can only focus on single tasks for a given length of time and need to be released from like
that gets at the second point of that, which is that attention is also limited in capacity throughout the course of, say, a day. The mere exercise of using your attention, of focusing very highly, is mentally fatiguing. Yes. And there's a lot of good research out there that shows that if you're asked to use more and more of that for some tasks, you will have less attentional control, less ability to inhibit responses, less ability to select attention for particular things later on in the day. And this is true not only for very cognitively demanding tasks like the game we played, but also even for very simple decisions. If I need to decide which shirt to put on in the morning, that is a decision which is taxing my cognitive resources. And there's less and less available as you go along through the day. In fact, a very good strategy that a lot of people can use effectively is just consciously limiting your own set of decisions that you have available. Having a routine, even something like I'm always going to have tacos on Tuesday, or I'm always going to wear this particular shirt on Friday. That saves your attentional capacity, saves your mental resources for other things where you might need them. And this will come up because if you ask people to do something which is very attentionally demanding, later on, they're not going to have it, and they're more likely to do things like, say, choose chocolate cake over a healthy snack. They're more likely to be able to lose their temper quickly over something where they shouldn't, just because they don't have as much attentional ability available to them later on. So this is something that you need to be cognizant of when building lesson plans, for example. You don't want to spend an entire session of just having kids doing arduous attention tasks, because that's a very good way of wearing them out.
Or even constantly making decisions.
Exactly.
Like it's good to throw in some and now we have distinct parameters, and this is what we're going to do. Decision fatigue is the term, right?
Yeah, that's a term that people use. Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So can you give just another word, please? You said the attention is the gateway to consciousness. Can you give another word for consciousness? Is that like knowledge? Does that include knowledge awareness, like awareness of knowledge? What else does that include?
I'm using the way I use consciousness is basically synonymous with awareness.
Okay. What?
Awareness.
Oh, okay.
Things that you are aware of. There may be trucks passing by outside. If you listen for them, you will notice it, but up until now, you are probably not aware of them.
Unless you can't help it.
Yeah, unless you can't help it, unless it does intrude upon your attention. That would be an external factor, which is guiding your attention, both for better or for worse. So pay better so attention. Okay, is that clear?
Yeah. I just don't want to.
So I'm almost done here, but there's one last aspect of attention that I want to talk about, which is automaticity. As tasks are repeated over and over and over, they become more and more automatic. What that means is that they require less attention, less attentional resources. They don't require deliberate decisions anymore, and they don't consume conscious resources. So these would be something like if you drive a car. Driving a car is something that was probably very cognitively demanding the first couple of times you do it, and as you do it more and more and more, it becomes more and more automatic. You don't really need to think about how to drive a car anymore. one nice thing about automaticity is that it allows you, this is what really supports your ability to do multiple things at once. So for example, walking and talking. If you want to walk down the street and have a conversation with somebody, you can do that because you don't need to pay a lot of attention to how you're walking. If you are recently recovering from a stroke, for example, and are not very good at walking, then walking and talking may be a very complex task. Yeah. So some good examples of automatic things might include, say, braking when you're driving. If you're driving and you see something run out in front of you, it's very automatic to jam on the brakes. It's just, and that's not because that's something that humans naturally do. It's because it's something that you've done over and over and over again in similar situations. Another great example is just reading a set of letters. If you look up here, if you can read English, and if you have practice in it, you're going to process what those words mean. It's automatic. That's not something that's automatic for someone who's just learning language because they haven't practiced it over and over again. It requires more conscious effort. So this is all to say that practicing and just the simple fact of doing things over and over and over again can make them more automatic. I put these math problems on here because they're also a good example of that. If you look at the first one, you probably can't not know the answer. You look at that and you automatically know what it was. I can't make you look at that and say don't know what the answer is to that. But you can, that latter one, if you don't want to know the answer, you don't have to. You can look at that and not know it. It's not automatic anymore. Okay? So that's just to illustrate the topic of automaticity. Okay, so to summarize on attention, attention is the gateway to consciousness, to awareness. Attention is fundamental to all of our controlled actions. If we want to be in control of what we want to do, then we need to be aware of that. And this is obviously highly involved in self-control, both from a more physiological perspective and from a more, behavior type of perspective as well. Two sides of the same coin. Attention involves ignoring some things and selecting other things. It's limited in capacity, both at a particular time and throughout a course of time. And it's something that can be practiced. You can practice, you can actually gain better attentional skills by practicing both specific tasks to get better at those specific tasks and practicing a general ability, having more attentional capacity. And that's, so that's that. So thanks for your attention. And
can you go back to the last slide, please?
sure. I will post these on the Google groups as well. So.
Sean, it often occurs to me that the reason why kids who study music seem to do well is the amount of attention that they learn to bring to bear when they're practicing.
Yeah.
That there's very few things in life that require as much sustained focus as that.
Yeah, cognitive neuroscientists do believe that that's one of the major reasons that we see an increase in the abilities of musicians compared to non-musicians. Music as an activity does require a lot of focused attention, both the ability to inhibit some responses that you would like to make in some cases, and to pay attention to the music as it's ongoing, both in terms of your own practice and in terms of coordinating with other musicians as well. So there's a very strong aspect.
It's a skill
And
to
just so
transfer,
much-
right?
Yes,
And there's
I mean, that's-
that repeats,
Yes.
that comes automatic, right?
Yes. Yeah, and that's actually really at the core of why I'm here, because there does seem to be this transfer between things like artistic activities like music and general cognitive skills, and we do see that transfer. Yeah. Any other questions or?
I just have a comment. I realized the response in English when I pass out instruments various places around the room. The rule is, if you take your turn when it's not your turn, that was your turn. And so, you'll put down an instrument in front of a kid, and God help them if they pick it up and play it, because they've just lost their turn until it's time for everybody to do it. And so that's just classroom control, but I'm realizing it's the response inhibition third. I mean, that's the type of, that's the name.
Yeah,
So,
that is.
marshmallow.
Yeah, totally.
It's the
It's the marshmallow. That's right. That's
Absolutely.
exactly right.
Mhm.
Some kid lost their marshmallow today.
But it wasn't.
She won't do it again. No,
Right.
that's right. She was in grade 4.
So
She was
in grade 4, it's a
She was in
reasonable
grade 4.
expectation.
Yeah.
Even a 4-year-old can.
I was gonna say, I do. It's a reasonable in
Yeah.
grade 1.
Yeah.
But
I think
unfortunately,
parents can do
yeah.
it.
But taking turns with younger ones
It's hard.
is hard,
Mhm,
and I
sure
think
it
it
is.
starts that process.
Yeah, and something like taking turns
Yeah.
does involve response inhibition.
Right.
Let me give you a really simple example here. If you ask a child to count to 9, a young child, that involves a heavy amount of response inhibition right there. Because, God help them if they don't go to 10. My 5-year-old can do that, my 3-year-old can't.
Yeah.
It's something that really needs a lot of work, and it's hard.
Is one of the other reasons that taking turns is difficult is because it's like their disappointment is emotionally overwhelming, and that is taxing on their ability to then exercise self-control because of the limitedness of that.
That certainly can play a role in it. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of interplay. One of the things that really bugs me about Star Trek is the way that they portray Data as being all cognition and no emotion, when we know that there's a really strong interplay between those two. Our emotions affect our cognitive skills and vice versa. I don't think they can be separated quite as easily as it's portrayed in things like science fiction.
So
Glad I got that off my chest.
What do you think of the thing around with, Sherlock Holmes?
Ah.
The Aspergian.
Yeah, that's there's a lot of people who do surmise that about him. Yeah, I think it's but even there's they're not divorced from emotion, so it's very different than that.
So in other words, we need to base our expectations or our degree of challenge we're expecting cognitively on like the emotional state or on them to try
And you can modulate that. Like one of the reasons the marshmallow experiment is so strong is because it's so hard to resist a marshmallow. If you gave them something they didn't care as much for, like a piece of bread, they would find it, even if they like a piece of bread, they would find it much easier to resist because it's not, oh my God, marshmallow. It's that level of desire can come into play.
What age do they start to develop also a sense of other? So like 5, I think their sense is still that, or even 3, if they're having an emotional state, they think that you're in it too, that's, like when does that start to close and then the other begins?
Well, that has a lot to do with aspects of cognitive flexibility.
Okay.
And essentially that's the ability to, it brings in some aspects of categorization of task switching, but it's the ability to take the perspective of another person. That's heavily involved in this, in what we term the theory of mind.
Mm-hmm.
So the realization that other people are not you and have minds of their own, which is something that takes a while to develop.
What age usually? Is there a particular?
Generally, that's something that starts around age 2 or so, but
I would say that's really dependent on birth order as well. Because first kids and third kids tend, in my experience, to have a very different onset of that particular skill. A third kid is much more likely to understand these things earlier than a first child.
That would be an interesting thing to look at.
My third daughter's first words were mine. The oldest daughter didn't have a mine in her vocabulary until she was 3.
One thing I wanted to point out about the marshmallow experiment was that everyone who was on the younger end of that spectrum had
Yeah,
no
they
impulse
could.
control. Like,
Yeah.
there was really clearly the older kids who had
Yeah.
sort of that sense of duty or
Yeah. I
figured
I could do
the
it.
2-year-old was already
Right.
Yeah,
And
she's
what
still talking, she's eating it.
yeah, great.
What you actually
Everyone-
find in those experiments are that the kids who do the best are the ones who manage to find something else to.
Like those
Yeah.
twins.
Like the twins dancing,
Yeah.
I thought that was funny.
They're using selective attention. They're trying to focus on something else.
And I wonder if that experiment would change drastically if you had 2 kids in the room at the same time, always. Like what that would do to the numbers, because they would have each other. There was nothing in that room but a plate and a marshmallow.
Yeah.
And they have to sit in the chair.
Yeah, even if there was music or a painting or anything.
Yeah.
This is so interesting.
I think the test has been like expanded upon, and I'm sure you can speak more about this, by directing the kids to use visualization to like take that hotness of the appeal away by pretending the marshmallow is a fluffy cloud and you can't eat clouds, or
A piece of glue and it tastes
yeah,
disgusting.
exactly. Or imagining something totally.
Right.
Although you would still have that sensory input, right? Their sense of smell is so
Well, that's
keen.
helpful, but actually one of the best strategies that any kids use is just walking away and not looking.
Yes.
Yes.
Sitting
That's
under
the
the
most
table,
effective
hiding
strategy.
it.
lot of willpower though, right? 'Cause
Yeah.
it's right there.
One thing too, I find interesting, like, this is the only, it just reminded me of hypnosis for childbirth. Like training your brain to shut off the signal of pain. And I use that very successfully, and I found that really amazing, the power of the consciousness. You can actually shut off sort of those kind of very basic needs of stopping pain.
Yeah, I mean, that would be essentially just trying to inhibit that.
Yeah, just do it.
Yeah.
Great. 10 minutes break?
We need a quick break.